The views expressed are not those of local community broadcasting, WYML LP, or its management, volunteers, or underwriters. Greetings and welcome back to the Personal Safety Show. This is Marcus Melnick from Firearm Mentor, your host. And it appears that I am not bulletproof, and I don't mean I got shot, because I did not get shot. What I mean is COVID has touched our home, and I did not dodge that bullet. So last week we had a rerun play. I'm not a fan of reruns unless you're talking about rerun from the 1970 show. I forgot what it's called. What's happening now? In any event, we're back, and you may be hearing it in my voice. I may be a little gravelly. I was very, very ill not hospital ill, but I was pretty messed up for about a day and a half. Rest of it was like a bad cold/flu. This show is going to focus on a new technology. And before we do, we're going to talk about all the things that are leading up to this new technology. But before we jump in and address that, I'd like to announce that we are opening a new division of my company, and that is called Stress to Logic. And it is the website, which is up but still under development, is stress2logic.com. And this came out of the book that I wrote, The Opposite of Safe, which is available at theoppositeofsafe.com. I have several websites out there. That's the one where you can find the books that I've written. With that said, the new business is going to be going to conferences and delivering keynote speeches. The first keynote speech is going to be on overcoming the human stress response in business. So, as a personal safety specialist, you know that I've studied self-defense incidents and violence, and recently I've realized, and maybe I'm kind of slow on this, but I've realized that the human stress response is the same whether I'm in a boardroom at a Fortune 500 company getting grilled by a chairman of the board, or whether I'm on the street in a shootout. We all experience the exact same things. The brain cannot differentiate between life-threatening stress and high stress that's not life-threatening. Just to give you an example, there are people out there who do not like to speak publicly, and their respiration increases, their heart rate, their blood pressure. They have all of these little effects, their perceptual and cognitive changes. And this keynote, which can be delivered in 1, 2, or 4 hours as a training seminar, actually goes in and discusses what that human stress response is and provides techniques to overcome it. So that in the business world, when someone is in the boardroom or they're starting to get asked difficult questions or they're at a podium, they can understand, okay, I'm having a human stress response. This is what I need to do to overcome that, to maintain a clear mind, to maintain clear perception. So that is one talk we're going to be giving. Another one for people who do not know me is I have lost 120 pounds. So the second keynote is going to be on what my journey was, how I lost weight, and tips and tricks to help other people lose weight. Once I got these tips and tricks, it wasn't as difficult as it was in the past. Of course, I was super committed, and by having gastric bypass surgery, I'm definitely super committed because you don't go backwards. So I am down 120 pounds. It's great. I love it, and I will discuss that as my second keynote. My third keynote has to do with the first chapter of my career, which was working in hospital security and hospital security management. A lot of people don't realize that in a hospital, there can be violence, and I mean a lot of violence that nobody even realizes. Emergency rooms take in people who are intoxicated both on alcohol and drugs, and a lot of times they are psychologically not there because they are impaired due to the substance. There are also people who go into who are psychiatric patients on a monthly basis, and when I worked in healthcare, we used to get these patients coming in pretending to shoot laser beams out of their fingers about 3 weeks into each month. So this is what happened. At the beginning of the month, they got their government subsidy check. They spent it. 3 weeks later, they need another week of square meals, so they pretend like they're nuts. And they go into the emergency room and they have all these different perceptions and they work the system. And then they're hospitalized for a few days, or they're evaluated, or in any event, they're surviving, and that's how they survive. That's not a judgment. It is what it is. There are also regular people in hospitals who actually can become violent. I've seen it. I've seen visitors become violent. I saw one case where a patient was brought in because he had a self-inflicted gunshot wound, and it was his friend's gun, and the two friends, one who owned the gun, one who didn't own the gun, got in a physical altercation in the emergency room waiting room. So that happens a lot. Security is called all the time to psychiatric units as well as to intensive care. There's a phenomenon out there called ICU psychosis. And ICU psychosis, and I'm not a physician, I've just experienced a lot of this. ICU psychosis is when somebody just absolutely, they are fighting for survival and they're unaware of their surroundings. For example, someone's been intubated. Well, they wake up, they try to pull the tube out. That's natural. But then they start fighting the staff because they don't understand they need that to live. And we would have to restrain people in intensive care units as well, a lot of times coming out of major sedated surgery, open heart surgery, major stuff. And not that these people were crazy or violent, but they're fighting to survive. They're usually, typically good people. So those are going to be my 3 keynotes to begin with, and the website is going to be stress2logic.com. We're going to have plenty of updates coming up. As a concealed carry instructor, I often get students in class who are unsure whether they should carry around in their semi-automatic chamber or not, and it's really an individual decision. There is going to be other instructors out there that are going to point the finger at me saying, no, if you're not carrying in the chamber, you're carrying a club. Yeah, maybe so, but the person's training has to, and their comfort level has to be there for them to carry a firearm. As we know, a revolver has multiple chambers. If you think about the Wild West, it was a 6-shooter, so it had 6 chambers. The chamber that was in line with the barrel often did not have a round in it. It was often a empty chamber. It really wasn't empty because cowboys would have a $20 bill rolled up for funeral expenses in that chamber, but it wouldn't fire anything because there's no combustible material, no gunpowder, no cartridge in that chamber. The reason why they did that is because there weren't safety mechanisms that are in existence today, and if a revolver fell and the back of the hammer was caught at the right angle, the gun would discharge. It would drop the firing pin into the cartridge, into the primer, and then it would discharge. So carrying without one in the chamber is not a new concept. In class, I get people that are unsure. They don't know if they should carry in the chamber. I always recommend carrying with a round chambered if you are comfortable doing so. And if you are comfortable doing so, after you've chambered the round, you need to press check the gun just to make sure you did chamber the round, particularly if you are a newer shooter, and then remove the magazine and backfill that one bullet, because that one bullet might mean the difference between life and death. So I recommend a full magazine with one in the chamber and the magazine backfilled. That's why it's full. There's other different types of applications and reasons why you wouldn't want to carry in the chamber. First of all, the Israeli military does not carry their handguns with one in the chamber. They have a drawing technique that allows them to rack the slide as they deploy the firearm. You can check out those types of videos on YouTube, but unless you're well practiced with it, unless you're well regulated with it, see what I did there? Then you are not going to be able to do it in a stressful situation. So constantly practice in front of the mirror. Buy some snap caps. Do not use real ammo. Real ammo should not even be present in the same room. and continue to practice in front of the mirror until your muscle memory develops. Some people have said to me, well, I've got little kids and the little kids crawl all over me, and I don't want to have a holstered gun and have the kids crawl all over me. So my comfort level is to not have one in the chamber. Totally get that. You want to protect your family. Protecting your family doesn't necessarily only mean that you have a firearm and you're going to fend off the bad guys, but it means protecting them. I mentioned at the beginning of the episode that COVID has struck our house, and my stepson did not get it this time. And guess what? My job is to protect him. I'm the protector of the family. What does that mean? Does that mean doing a barrel roll, coming into the living room like John Wick and taking care of the bad guys? No. What that means is, guess what? I had to wear a mask to protect him. I had to eat in my room. I had to sequester from him. The joke I tell is, hey, look, I hope you like pizza and pancakes because that's all that fits under the door. But I did have to be sequestered from him and my wife. And it was not easy, but that's what you do as a family person to protect your family. If somebody feels like they should not be carrying a round in the chamber to protect their family, yeah, there's positives and negatives and pros and cons, but that person has to make that decision for themselves. As an instructor, I cannot. As a fellow gun owner, you cannot. They're going to do what they're going to do. And as long as it's not unsafe, who cares? For some people, it is an added layer of safety. They believe the gun will not, I'm making air quotes, go off, even though you need something on the trigger, a finger, to make the gun discharge. Finger is the most likely thing, but other things can get caught there and cause the gun to discharge. For some people, it's just psychological comfort. They're not, and I read about this online just before the airing of the episode, but a lot of people are like, well, hey, if you're not comfortable carrying one in the chamber, I'm not comfortable with you owning a gun. That's kind of ridiculous. You're talking about people who are extremely experienced and maybe a little fearful, trying to dictate to new gun owners in a negative way. That's not how we're going to wrap people into the gun culture, by scaring them away with our opinions. Is my opinion one that you should carry in the chamber? Yes, but at the same time, it's your life is not my decision. So, we are going to be talking with Tom Holland, and Tom Holland has this amazing new product, which we'll talk about. It is mislabeled a lot of times as a smart gun. No, wait, just hear me out here. This type of device is not intended to replace handguns. It's a user authentication system where only the shooter can shoot the gun, or only the gun owner can shoot the gun. It'll get explained as we get into this. So there are definitely applications for this. One application is, I have small children at home, they climb all over me, but I want to be able to deploy my firearm as quickly as possible. This system prevents it from firing in your holster unless certain scenarios, certain buttons are pushed. And I don't mean that literally. This is a great, great product. I am very, very happy with it. I have played with it. I saw it at the USCCA show. That's where I met Tom Holland. And the reality is it does have an application as long as it's not a replacement for non-user authenticated firearms. With that said, I hope you enjoy this next section. It is going to be absolutely phenomenal. Before we get to it, let me talk about some of the things that are going on. You've all heard about it. It's here. Firearm registration in Illinois. Illinois residents have until December 31st to go on the Illinois State Police website if they have magazines, handgun magazines that are over 15 rounds, and or rifle magazines that are over 10 rounds. They'll have to sign an affidavit on the state police website that says they do own these devices. They also, if they have a firearm that's been identified as a, quote, assault weapon, and a lot of that is arbitrary, but anyone who has an assault weapon, which is a firearm that holds, handgun that holds more than 15 rounds, or a rifle that holds more than 10 rounds, you're going to have to register that firearm with the serial numbers. So it's handguns, shotguns, rifles. If you go back to a previous episode, you can check it out on my YouTube page. We discuss it. We discuss what is an assault weapon according to what our wonderful state of Illinois says. With that said, stay tuned. Tom Holland is up next. Tom, welcome to the show.
Marcus, thank you for having me.
I met Tom at the USCCA conference, and he was representing a very new and innovative product. Tom, can you tell us what is your personal origin story, and how did you get involved working with firearms and specifically with Free State?
Thank you so much for having me on the show. My personal background, married, have 4 children who are now adults. Grew up in the Midwest, originally from born and raised in Indiana. My grandparents were farmers. They grew up on the farm, obviously, as did my mom. She was a farm girl. At an early age, I was always comfortable around shotguns. Had fired shotguns, lots, some rifles, primarily shotguns. Just basically in the backyard, shoot plate pigeons. Basically, as I became older, actually had an incident in high school that kind of left me with an impression about firearms. There was an acquaintance that actually, he and a neighbor evidently had gotten into his father's firearms, and he was actually tragically killed over that incident. And so, as I became an adult and had a family, we kind of had this ironclad rule as far as that my wife and I just like we could have shotguns in the house, but there was never going to be any handguns at all. Just did not want our kids getting into that and having a potentially tragic situation.
Quite honestly, there are people out there who are in a similar situation as you, and there's nothing right or wrong about it. You have to make your own decision for your own family. So
that's exactly right, Marcus. It really comes down to really what is your security situation and what do you best feel comfortable. Perfect. So how I started, and so just so your readers understand, I'm really an entrepreneur by nature. I started my own IT consulting business with my wife back in 1994. That's when we actually became active. I started a farm winery, and I run that today as well. So, I'm always an entrepreneur, a small business guy, starting my own things, doing my own. Anyway, so how I got into firearms with this particular situation was back in 2014. I was actually watching an episode All In with Chris Hayes, and he did this segment about how the German firm Armonics, that is, was actually trying to introduce to America a gun called the IP-1, which was a 22 caliber, and they called it a smart gun, a term that I profusely dislike and push back on every time I hear somebody else use that. Basically, what happened with the Armonics IP-1 was that it was soundly rejected by firearms consumers here in America for a couple of reasons. And what intrigued me about the technology was, in fact, that it was like, oh, this could possibly be something for, once again, those security situations of where, as an option, not as a preference, but as an option for somebody wanting to have a firearm in the home, be it the collateral surroundings, this might be an option and consideration for them. I saw that article, but I also knew at the time, just my political instincts told me that, at least in 2014, that was not the time to pursue that. But I never did forget that, and basically in 2019, I decided that I wanted to basically look further at that opportunity, and then that's when basically we started moving forward on the concept of a user authentication firearm, and our company started Free State Firearms.
So this is a firearm, and I want to explain it to our listeners just so that you understand. You put on a ring on your finger, and that ring allows the firearm electronically to fire. And I didn't actually shoot the gun, but I dry fired it with the ring, without the ring, and it was very intriguing to me. Can you tell us about the history, the last probably 4 years of Free State Firearms?
Certainly. I had this idea of, hey, I think it's time to pursue this. Let's see what the market thinks. And I went to my business attorney, a wonderful gentleman named Brendan Fagan, and asked them to get involved with me. And he had some reservations, but after he did his homework, we decided maybe it wasn't so crazy after all. But what we did is we actually went to Kansas State University. They have a center called the Technology Development Institute. We basically asked these guys, hey, we saw this thing back in 2014 about, this firearm RFID type of a deal. Is this something that you could design and build for us if we paid you? And they looked at it and said, sure, no problem at all. And what they further recommended we do is that we implement our initial offering on the tried and true 1911 platform. That was the direction we took off. We were initially thinking implementing the RFID tag in a glove versus a ring, because one of our early targeted demographics was law enforcement, specifically the use case of prisoner transport. But as we started going to different trade shows and getting feedback, we quickly learned from both law enforcement and heard from consumers informally that the glove was really not workable, and the ring was the way to go. And so, given the fact that we were looking at a use case of where law enforcement did not ever want to have a prisoner wrestling over a gun and having that gun possibly going off, we decided to implement our solution where the user, the authorized user, in this case the officer, he pressed the grip safety and that ring is actually on the grip of the gun. The gun is TS unlocks and will fire, but once that ring comes off, the firearm is then operable. So that's kind of the basic tenets that we designed that. As you can imagine, there's a rather interesting history around the whole technology. Once again, certain people have derisively referred to it as smart gun technology. This really goes back to the late 1990s, where Lieutenant Gentleman Ed Schultz, former CEO of Smith & Wesson, and an agreement with the government to discharge a myriad of lawsuits that have been filed by cities and state attorneys general against them. One of the things CEO Schultz agreed to do was to introduce basically a quote-unquote safe firearm. As a result of that, Smith & Wesson almost went bankrupt in 2000, when basically the rest of the industry really turned against them, and they suffered a massive boycott and almost went out of business.
Was that the lock that just was inserted into the revolvers? Is that what you're talking about?
No. There was, as part of that agreement with the Clinton administration, they did make the agreement to include safety locks with guns. But there was also, my understanding is there was a separate commitment to actually building and designing what they called a safe gun. And this is when Smith & Wesson embarked on intellectual property around having a pistol operated with RFID. Okay. And this was the thing that really got them in hot water with the NRA and certain segments of the gun buying community.
Got it.
And so at that point then, and it's also interesting to note that Remington was actually working on some of this technology as well. But basically what happens, you saw, because of the backlash against the gun buying community at that time, the major gun manufacturers just dropped it like a hot potato. And officially they still refuse to consider it or look at it because they saw what happened to Smith & Wesson. And what happened then is that you've had subsequent some other companies have come along, a group called BioFire, a guy named Kai Kepler, I believe is his name, out of MIT. He's been working on this, and he actually used the term smart gun, and they have a product out there that they're saying, I believe, is going to be released later this year. It's a proprietary firearm platform. They use something called fingerprint recognition. They also have a backup in case that doesn't work. They have a facial recognition camera in the back of their firearm, I believe. And there's another firm out there, Lodestar Works, that offers their own firearm as well too that unlocks like 3 different. But our concern is that there's certain companies that still use that term smart gun, and we think it's a very bad term to use because traditional gun owners, when they hear the term smart gun, I think it's really a bad term to use because it starts basically turning potential consumers against your product right out of the gate. I think the normal question a traditional firearm is asked like, well, so if I don't own a smart gun, does that mean I'm dumb? Does it mean my guns are inferior? With the recent promotion, what BioFire has done, they've also, I think, have linked fingerprint recognition to that term smart gun. I personally believe, at least for our use cases that we've seen, RFID is a much more superior way to go in unlocking a firearm when it comes to reliability and quick turnaround.
How close does the ring have to be to the gun to work?
The ring actually has to be on the grip, the firearm's grip. And once again, that was for our use case of where we did not want officers wrestling with a prisoner over a firearm that could potentially going on.
Actually, I'm thinking about other applications as well, like hospital security, because you're dealing with people who are intoxicated, emotionally compromised, etc. I think that's a great application. Can you share, and if you can't, that's okay, but can you share what agencies use the firearm?
I cannot. What I can tell your users, though, is that we did do, well, I will say this much. We actually have had one sheriff's office buy our firearm outright. They bought it under the auspices of it being a beta product. They have evaluated it. They want us to go ahead and harden it. And our promise to them is that we intend to deliver that to them first quarter next year. We also had 5 other law enforcement agencies. This is really across the Midwest, different states, that basically did a beta evaluation of our products as well too. We got some great feedback from those organizations. We're working with a group called the National Gun Safety Consortium, and they had the law enforcement agencies who are their members, in essence, of that nonprofit group. Once again, we will take the feedback from our customer, our sheriff's office customer, as well as the Gun Safety Consortium folks, and then get that hardened into a product and delivery for consumers ready to go first quarter 2024.
The views expressed are not those of local community broadcasting, WYML LP, or its management, volunteers, or underwriters.